Dealings with the Dead, number 32. Making mourning, as an abstract phrase, is about as intelligible as making fish. These arbitrary modes of expression have ever been well enough understood, nevertheless, by those employed in the respective operations. Making mourning, in ancient times, was assigned to that class of hired women termed Praeficae, to whom I have had occasion to refer. They are thus described by Stephens: ad heperi solebant funeri, mercede conducta ut flarent et fortia facta lauderent. They were called the funerals and paid to shed tears and relate the famous actions of the defunct, doubtless by practice and continual exercise of the will over the lacrimary organs. They acquire the power of forcing mechanical tears. We have a specimen of this power in the case of Miss Sophie Stretfield, so often referred to by Madame de Arblay in her account of those happy days at Miss Thrale's. Making mourning in modern times is, with a few touching exceptions, confined to that important class, the dressmakers. The time allowed for mourning was determined by laws of Numa. Plutarch informs us that no mourning was allowed for a child that died under 3 years, and for all others a month. For every year it had lived, but never to exceed 10, which was the longest term allowed for any mourning. I don't think emotions work like that. We often meet with the term luctus annus, the year of mourning, but the year of Romulus contained but 10 months, and though Numa added 2 to the calendar, the term of mourning remained unchanged. The howlers, or wailing women, were employed also in Greece and in Judea. Thus in Jeremiah 9:17, call for the mourning women, and so on, and let them make haste and take up a wailing for us, that our eyes may run down with tears, and so on. By the laws of Numa, widows were required to mourn 10 months, or during the year of Romulus. Thus, Ovid, what does fast stand for? 135. Per totidem mensis funerare conjugis uxor sustenent in vidna tristia signa domo. Numa was rather severe upon widows. The tristia signa spoken of by Ovid were sufficiently mournful. According to Kirchmann de funeral, right? 4:11, they were not to stir abroad in public, to abstain entirely from all entertainments, to lay aside every kind of ornament, to dress in black, and not even to kindle a fire in their houses. Not content with stinting and freezing these poor lone creatures to death, Numa forbade them to repeat the matrimonial experiment for 10 months. Indeed, it was accounted infamous for a widow to marry within that period. As though he were resolved to add insult to injury, he, according to Plutarch, permitted those to violate this law who would make up their minds to sacrifice a cow with calf. This unnatural sacrifice was intended by Numa to frighten the widows. Doubtless, in many instances, the legislative bugbear was effectual, but it is quite probable there were some courageous women in those days, as there are at present, who would have slaughtered a whole drove rather than yield a tender point. The Jews expressed their grief for the dead of their near friends by weeping and crying aloud, beating their breasts, rending their clothes, tearing their flesh, pulling their hair, and starving themselves. They neither dressed, nor made their beds, nor washed, nor saw visitors, nor shaved, nor cut their nails, and made their toilets with sackcloth and ashes. Now, a practicing Jew will not shave their face at all. Well, at least the males won't. The mourning of the Jews lasted commonly 7 days, and never more than 30, quite long enough, we should think, for such an exhibition of filth and folly. The Greeks also did much of all this. They covered themselves with dust and dirt, and rolled in the mire, and beat their breasts, and tore their faces. The color of the mourning garb among the Romans was originally black, from the time of Domitian, white. Domitian, okay, yeah. It's not, At present, the color of the mourning dress in Europe is black. In China, white. In Turkey, blue or violet. In Egypt, yellow. In Ethiopia, brown. There have come down to us 2 admirable letters from Seneca, 63 and 99, on the subject of lamentation for the dead. The first to Lucilius, after the death of his friend Flaccus. The second to Lucilius, communicating the letter Seneca had written to Murulus on the death of his son. These letters must be read cum grano salis on account of the stoical philosophy of the writer. He admits the propriety of decent sorrow, but is opposed to violent and unmeasured lamentations. Nec sici sint oculi amico nec fluat. Shed tears if you have lost your friend, but do not cry your eyes out. Lacrimandum est, non plorandum. Let there be weeping but not wailing. He cites for the advantage of Lucilius the counsel of Lucius to Achilles, whose grief for the death of Patroclus had become inordinate, to give 1 whole day to his sorrow and have done with it. He considers it not honorable for men to exhibit their grief beyond the term of 2 or 3 days. Such, upon the authority of Tacitus, de more, what does more stand for? Germ, is it something about Germans? 27, was the practice of the ancient Germans. Okay. Funerum nulla ambitio, lines left out. Struum rogi nec vestibus nec odoribus cumulat, lines left out. Lamenta ac ecrimus cito dolorum et tristitiam tarde panunt femis legure honestum est virus iminis. There was no pride of funeral parade. They heaped no garments, no odors upon the pile. They speedily laid aside their tears and laments. Not so their grief and sorrow. It was becoming for women to mourn, for men to cherish in their memories. In his letter to Lucilius, Seneca enters upon an investigation as to the real origin of all this apparent sorrow, so freely and generally manifested for the dead, and a sober conviction breaks forth in the words Nemo tristis sibi est, o in felicum stultitiam est, et qua et dolores ambitio. No one mourns for himself alone. O miserable folly! There is ambition even in our sorrow. The passage recalls Martial's epigram 34, de Gellia. Amicium non flet, quam sola est Gellia petrem, sequis adest Jusaa prosiliunt lacrimae non dullet hic quisquis landari Gellia quarit illa dolet veraque sine teste dolet. Arthur Murphy, in his edition of Dr. Johnson's works, ascribes to the great man the following extraordinary lines: "If the man who turnips cry not when his father dies. 'Tis a proof that he had rather have a turnip than his father." Under the doctor's sanction for a bagatelle, I may offer a translation of Martial's epigram: "When no living soul is nigh, Gellia's filial grief is dry. Call some morning, and I'll warrant Gellia I shed a perfect torrent. Tears unforward true sorrow draws, Gellia weeps for mere applause. It is our fortune to witness not a little of this in our line. We are compelled to drop in at odd, disjointed moments when the not altogether disagreeable occupations of the survivors contrast, rather oddly to be sure, with the graver duties to the dead. A rich widow, like Dr. Johnson's protege, in his letter to Chesterfield, is commonly overburdened with help. It is quite surprising to observe the solicitude about her health, and how very fervent the hope of her neighbors becomes that she may not have taken cold. The most prominent personages after the widow are the next of kin, are the coffin maker and the dressmaker, both solicitous of making an excellent fit. Those who, like myself, have had long practice in families are often admitted to familiar interviews with the chief mourners, which are likely to take place in the midst of dressmakers and artists of all sorts. How many acres of black crape have I witnessed in half a century? Mr. Abner, good Mr. Abner, said Miss. Dear Mr. Abner, said she, I shall not forget your kindness. How pleasant it is on these occasions to see a face one knows. You buried my first husband. I thought there was nothing like that. And you buried my second husband. And oh dear me, I thought there was nothing like that. And now, oh dear, dear me, you are going to bury my third. How am I supported? It is hard to tell, but the widow's God will carry me through this and other trials. For aught I know, Miss Butterkin, don't you think that dress should be fuller behind? Oh dear, ma'am, your fine shape, you know, said Miss Butterkin. There now, Miss Butterkin, at any other time I dare say I should be pleased with your flattery, but grief has brought down my flesh and spirits terribly. Good morning, dear Mr. Abner. Remember, there will be no postponement on account of the weather. One thing to prevent that is, do more when the weather's good, right?